I want to get into some Texas football discussion. We talked about the defensive backfield, which I think right now, depending on how Texas does in the transfer portal, trying to acquire some defensive backs, depending on how they do, also as well, they're trying to acquire another defensive tackle too. They already got Bill Norton, they got Sevilla. I think by the end of the transfer portal window, I think it closes April 30th. You could feel better about the Texas interior D line than you do about the Texas defensive backfield, depending on how you saw and your perspective on the spring game. But I went back and looked at the spring game just to look at some of the coverage busts and everything that went down. And unfortunately, the problem with the secondary is a multifactorial one. If you're just looking at the technique and the fundamentals that failed them in the spring game, and you're looking at the coverage breakdowns that they had in the spring game, there are a couple of concepts that Texas has struggled with. They struggled with last season, and they struggled with in 2022 as well. And I don't know if schematically it is just these are concepts that PK's defense has a hard time defending because of the way the structure of the defense and the way that it is built, or if the coaching of the players has not really helped them to be able to master these concepts or giving them the tools they need to better defend these concepts. Right. So let's start with, take inside breaking routes, just simple inside breaking routes, whatever you're talking about, your slants, your post routes, your glance routes, your skinny posts, your in cuts, anything that's considered an inside, your six routes, anything that ends up breaking inside. Last season, Texas was terrible at defending inside cuts. They were, if you go look at the inside breaking routes, if you go look at on money downs, which is what I paid attention to, right? On money downs, that's third and fourth down. When teams targeted an inside breaking route on money downs, they converted 53%. And this is when I did Power Five starting quarterbacks targeting inside breaking routes last season on money downs. Their conversion rate was 53%. I mean, that's a really high number. And in the spring game, you go look at inside breaking routes for Texas, defending them, any of them. The completion rate was relatively low, but man, over almost 10 yards per attempt, basically 10 yards per attempt, targeting inside breaking routes. I looked at the first down touchdown rate of inside breaking routes in the spring game. 52% of the time they targeted an inside breaking route, it was a first down or a touchdown. Money down conversion rate of inside breaking routes in the spring game, 77%. Explosive play rate of inside breaking routes, targeting inside breaking routes in the spring game, almost 29%. It's the same issues that they had last season, and that's leverage. It's not having the proper leverage. If you're going to play man coverage, you should be inside leverage. Even if you're playing some zone coverage, unless it's a reduced split or it's a compressed set or a condensed set formation, you still should be leaning toward inside leverage, especially on the wide side of the field. Hell, and even sometimes, I would say even more sometimes in the boundary side, because you want to use the sideline as another defender. They don't do that. They didn't do it last year. They don't do it again. Now, they were asked about leverage last season, and they said leverage is determined by the coverage and not necessarily the technique that the players can deploy themselves. But it doesn't make sense to still be head up or outside leverage when you either don't have inside help or your inside help is not there. And I saw it in the spring game multiple times too. Even Gavin Holmes, the touchdown that he got beat on for the 75-yarder, he was head up to outside leverage, even though he was in the boundary and the players from the numbers. Get inside, use the sideline as another defender. So it's simple stuff that was the same stuff that affected them last year, came to fruition in the spring game. They didn't have a lot of bunch formations because Sark didn't do a lot of sophisticated stuff formationally. But the first touchdown they gave up to Arch Manning, the 75-yard touchdown to DeAndre Moore, it was tight twins, closely clustered groups of receivers. Last season, when they had to defend closely clustered groups of receivers, and they did it again, by the way, the game-winning touchdown that Trey Owens threw to Ryan Wingo. Now, these are young guys. But my point is, are they being taught the proper technique and the proper fundamentals, or is the system something that has a vulnerability to these things? When you look at targets to bunch formation last season for Texas overall, like I said, closely clustered groups of receivers, you're looking at, and on money downs, is kind of what I was looking at, 72% conversion rate last season on money downs. But if you just look at overall targets to bunch, 79% completion rate, over 11 yards per attempt last season. And like I said, that was something that they struggled with in the spring game. Another concept that Texas used. Didn't use a lot of it, but they used it, and Texas DB struggled passing off receivers in coverage. And I mean, they also struggled versus empty formation last year. We won't get into that. Texas didn't run a lot of empty. They ran like 6 plays of it. I think they'll run more of it, but Texas is susceptible to that too. So what I'm trying to figure out, and I will dive deeper into it, is this a vulnerability within the structure of the defense? Because now I've seen it persist for like 2 going on 3 years. Or is this something that is being taught, or something that isn't being taught? Are they being taught the wrong fundamentals and techniques as players, and that's why you're getting, like I said, the same issues that are persisting in the secondary, and that's the reason why they're not a sound secondary. As we pointed out, Patrick, they got talent, but the sum of its parts doesn't add up. The talent is there, but they don't play well as a unit.
Is there a possibility that could be part of too, that they're just not necessarily technically, but unprepared mentally of understanding exactly all the concepts that may be coming at them, fully knowing the film on each receiver that they're going to be going up against, and fighting battles without all the information, where it's just you're setting yourself up to lose if you're not doing enough prep and not enough, research on each team. Is that a part of it too? Or could be?
You think they know their own team in the spring game. You think they know these guys really well. But it looked like they had never seen some of these players or some of those concepts. So yeah, I mean, and in the spring game, I didn't even bring this up, but they haven't been able to defend the deep ball in a couple of years. They've had issues just defending the deep ball. We know it came to fruition in the obviously in the Sugar Bowl. Was a big issue, and I believe Michael Penix was 6 of 8 on passes 20 yards or more down the field. Some crazy, ridiculous number. Yeah, he was 6 of 8 on passes 20 yards or more down the field. And in this spring game, I went back and looked at the deep balls. I believe if you count the double pass, Texas allowed 5 of 11 deep balls to be completed, 20 yards or more down the field. That's a high number. That's a I mean, you talk about 45%, something like that. That's a pretty high number of deep balls to be completed. So that's something that happened last year. They came back down them, and when I went back and tracked it, Texas last season against starting quarterbacks. Remember, they played a lot of backup quarterbacks last season too. But when they played starting quarterbacks, Power 5 starting quarterbacks, teams completed 42% of their passes 20 yards or more down the field. And they completed 45% in the spring game. So the only problem with, the spring game to me was that there were not a lot of contested catches. And for me, somebody who looks very closely at it, the same issues that they had last season were the exact same issues they had in the spring game. Deep ball, can't pass off receivers in zone coverage really well. Their eyes are in the bad place, bad angles to the football, and the same concepts, whether you're talking about closely clustered groups of receivers, inside breaking routes and inside leverage, defending the deep ball. They were the same issues that came up in the spring game, and they did not fix. So yes, they need help in terms of personnel. They need to add more corners and more defensive backs, but they also need help with certain concepts. Because if I'm going up against Texas, I know exactly how to beat this